Well, you can see I've made a little bit of a start on the investigations of this 1974 Sport, and generally speaking it's looking very clean. There is surface rust on the valve gear. I've got the rear valve gear off completely, but you can see that light coating of fuzz on the front stuff. It'll all clean up. The rocker box, and I'm going to drop all the bolts on the floor, is lovely and clean. You can see the crow's feet that condense the oil mist onto the rockers. I'll give these a little bit of a wash and a clean up, but very, very clean inside, which tends to make me believe the 26,000 kilometers on the clock. Now, one of the problems with these earlier engines is these solid intake manifolds, and this is actually the second design. The originals didn't have this insulator block, but they screw in to the heads and then have a locking ring, and people have a lot of difficulty keeping these tight, and you can see there's quite a few scars and so on as people have tried to drive this ring round and get it locked. Access isn't brilliant. So, taking advantage of the fact that the valves are shut because the valve gear's off, I've been scraping out the threads, getting them as clean as possible, and I'll get the toothbrush and some solvent out, and hopefully I can get in there with my castle nut tool that I inherited. I'll just go over to the bench and grab that. So here we go. This is a set of professionally made jaws, because they've clearly got part numbers on. Whether they were intended for mounting on a King Dick adjustable like this or not, I don't know, but they're on there, and I'm hoping that they will be a reasonable fit, and it looks like they will be, onto there, and we'll see if there's actually clearance to lock it up. Otherwise I may have to look into making a little C-spanner or something, but I'll Loctite this back in place. I may get in some high temperature Loctite. I'll check the temperature rating on the thread lock I have got, and whilst we're over at the bench here, got the carburetors, and I'm keeping them separate at the moment. I tend not to worry about mixing the parts up. It's never caused any issues before. Had a bit of a struggle. This is the enrichment plunger that sits down this little hole here, and they normally come with a flip up lever, and this one will be converted to cable, and this one I just could not get it off the cable. You can see that sort of roughly circular spot that lines up with the end of that little passage in there, and that was gummed in solid, and I had to use a bit of heat to get that to release, and I still had to pull on the cable pretty hard, and when it let go this went flying, and I thought I might not find it. But the carbs, again, I mean, externally I often send bikes back with the carbs looking this clean, and this one arrived with them that clean. And the folk bowls are actually free of corrosion, but that's some really, really well gummed up fuel. That's fuel that's just evaporated away to nothing. So I will give the carbs the full strip down and ultrasonic cleaning treatment, because getting that residue out of the passages is problematic otherwise. And the reason I had the little castle nut tool out was to try and get the intake trumpet off, but it's just just crumbling. And so what I'll do is I'll just get the camera up on the tripod, and I'll attack I'll attack the metal with a series of pliers to get it off, and I'll show you just what a sort of state it's got into. Okay, this is a little awkward working around the camera, but all I'm going to do is grab hold of this, and see, it's just breaking off in chunks. And there we go. And the carburetor body itself is perfect. These are a zinc alloy too, but it's a different formulation, and you can see some cracking and crazing in it, and I can just break a lot of it up with hand pressure. So I've got to see if I've got any of the later plastic versions of these, or whether I'm going to have to order some in. Now, this valve gear, there's almost no detectable play in the rockers. If I wobble that, there's nothing. There's a little bit of wear on the tips. I probably will run a diamond file over those. Other than that, it's just surface rust, so I'm going to strip this down and just clean everything up. And normally I wouldn't worry about the order of parts, because I'd be replacing the rocker shaft and bushes, but since these are in good condition, I'm going to keep everything in its sets. So the overhung rocker is the exhaust. We've got the two thrust washers or shims. Keep that post together, and I'm just going to put that entire take the shim that went with it, which is that one, and we'll keep with that. Now I'll just get a bit of cloth and wipe down the rocker shaft. And you can see there is a pattern on the shaft. There's nothing I can feel through the glove. Just feel that there's a little bit of a wearage there. But these are in good enough condition that I wouldn't want to do anything to them. So it'll just be a question of cleaning the surface rust off and putting it all back together. I've just got some 600 grit wet and dry. It is something that's already used. Put a little bit of duck oil on it, and to be honest, just a few strokes like that and it's coming up pretty clean. That's all I'm going to do to it. I'm not going to go any further than that, but So that's as clean as I want to go. I mean, the finish here looks to be from the rolled stock. That'll do just fine. And this is of course the split block that actually clamps the rocker shaft. Now, as far as the rocker is concerned, there's virtually no surface rust, so just to wipe down, I'll perhaps give the adjuster screw a quick brush with a brass brush, and that'll all be good to put back together. I'll do the same on the inlet assembly and of course on the other cylinder, and that's all good to go back on. So I'm going to start reassembling the rocker shaft, and I'll show you the sequence to go through, because if you've got one of these in bits and you know, you haven't got another one to reference to, this is the assembly order. So the first thing is, we'll start with the rocker shaft, and you can see you've got 2 oil grooves on it. Now on this original rocker shaft they're quite shallow and they're very broad, and they actually take quite a lot of the proportion of the bearing surface, and on the late shafts the oiled grooves were just the same width as the circlip grooves. So anyway, we start with the circlip and the area that goes into the rocker post for the inlet valve, and you start off with a shim, and then the post, and the valve is going to go on this way round. So if the letter A is the right way up, the tip of the rocker points away from you, and if you compare the exhaust rocker post, which has got the clamp slot, again that goes towards the valves. So we then have the shim, put a drop of oil on the shaft, and second shim, the split post, and a shim, a little oil, the exhaust rocker, the shim, and finally the circlip. And you can, the tolerances on these rocker shafts used to vary quite a bit. Some of them there's quite a lot of end float, and the idea is that these 2 posts have a little bit of slop on the studs, so you can get the side float on the inlet valve adjusted, and then you push the whole shaft through for the exhaust valve. The later shafts they provided, they had a longer shaft which was for the 501 engines, which actually spaced the guides apart further, and you just use the long shaft with an extra spacer on. So that's all together and ready to go back onto the engine. I've discovered a problem with one of the inlet manifolds on this bike. Now, this is the early style inlet manifold that's metal with an insulator plate. I have in fact seen an earlier design without the insulator, only ever one. Now Marini dropped this design after a number of years, and and went to a rubber inlet manifold. So there was a stub that screwed into the head, and rather than the manifold plugging in to an insert, it instead goes over the stub on the carburetor. But this inlet manifold, they've obviously had difficulty keeping it tight, and it's fretted and the threads are worn. It's really hard to see it on camera. It's very easy to feel it. So I have a reasonable stock of the early manifolds, so I've gone and found another one, and I cleaned up the locking nut, and I'll install it with some thread locking compound, but of course I've got to get the angle right. So I've set it up with the air box and the carburetor inlet stub, and we'll get that on there, and hopefully this will stay where it's put and solve the problem.